Welcome back to Gray and Gritty. My name is LJ Winnefeld.
Hello, my name is Andy Winnefeld. It's good to be back with you.
Yeah, happy to be back with you, Dad, on this Sunday. So I gotta ask, what's at the top of your Christmas wish list?
Well, that's a tough problem because I'm an old guy and old guys don't really ask for much. But I've got like four or five things that I might put out. One is world peace or a really good sandwich, whichever one is easier to wrap. Maybe I was thinking last night a pet unicorn because I've been a very good negotiator this year. Possibly for my family to learn how to properly load a dishwasher, but I actually have a really good family at doing that. And maybe my two front teeth, a 401k match, and a secret to eternal youth, because getting up there. But, that's the kind of thing that gray people think about. How about you? What's on your list?
It kind of sounds AI generated, if I'm going to be honest. I don't know. The first one was good there with world peace or a sandwich, but how does a unicorn and a negotiator tied together?
Well, if you're a really good negotiator, then maybe you become a unicorn, which is otherwise a company worth $1 billion. But
I think that's more about storytelling, right? Because a lot of these companies, they're not profitable. Like a lot of these AI companies are not profitable, but they're really good at telling a story to get people to invest.
Hey, so what's more important, actually being worth $1 billion or having people think you're worth $1 billion? There's a really good question there, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know which I would probably have. Probably the $1 billion. Anyway, for my Christmas list, I think I'd probably start with a Navy victory next Saturday, although that's a couple of days before Christmas, but definitely a Navy victory. And then, I don't know, maybe a set of orders to the West Coast. I've got verbal confirmation that I'm going out there, but I don't actually have the paper, the black and white, telling me that I'm going to be on the West Coast. So that would definitely be nice. But
well, if you're nice and you're not naughty, maybe both of those things will come true.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any say in that, but if you could talk to the big man in the red coat, that would be great.
We did a podcast with him a couple years ago on the Adrenaline Zone. It was really, really good, high quality. So check out the Adrenaline Zone and the Santa Claus episode.
Yeah, that's right. You had an episode of the Adrenaline Zone that just dropped, right, or is about to?
Yeah, we just dropped an episode about the sort of how the intelligence world is changing. And how not only are really important people targets, but everybody's a target, and everybody now is in sort of one way or another an intelligence operative and trying to protect themselves. But it's a great episode.
That's with Anthony Vici, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've got his book right here on my desk. Yeah, something I've been meaning to read for a little while. But yeah, absolutely. I think. I want to try and see if we can get the Adrenaline Zone to just pop up in the Gray and Gritty feed. I think it's a great avenue. If Sandra would be good with that, I think it would just open it up to more people. I think it fits within, the niche of Gray and Gritty as well. Talking to interesting people about risk and other interesting things that they do. So
yeah, I think we're on our 67th episode. So if you look back to the archives, there's some pretty cool guests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone from like Tim McGraw to Joseph Newgarden, all kinds of different people that take risk.
Yeah. But John Shire, the coach of the Duke Blue Devils basketball team, and IndyCar champions. It's a pretty broad group, as well as the only winner of the Iditarod 6 times. So check it out. Anyway, beyond promoting that podcast, let's get into a couple of interesting topics.
Absolutely. So today I want to talk to you about 3 things, Dad. 2 of them are like Wall Street Journal articles that I found interesting this week and I sent over your way. And then the other one is the new Navy procurement of their light amphibious ship, or their light landing ship. The first one is about the Lucas drone, the U.S. kamikaze drone that somewhat copies the Shahed drone from Iran. Those are those delta wing loitering munitions that we've seen hitting commercial shipping, U.S. positions, and Ukrainian cities. An Arizona company has built the FLM-136 drone, nicknamed the Lucas, by taking apart some of these captured Shahed drones and reverse engineering them. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of, the Houthis or the Iranians when like a Reaper or some other kind of American drone goes down. A lot of times they try to reverse engineer and create one for themselves. So it's kind of funny seeing the flip side of this. But these drones are supposed to cost only $35,000 a pop, have an endurance of about 6 hours. in a range in the hundreds of nautical miles. They're going to be deployed as a part of a task force over to the Middle East as a new operational one-way attack drone unit under CENTCOM. They're primarily going to be aimed at countering Iranian drones, Iranian tactics with their proxies over there in the Middle East. Strategically, the Shaheeds have proven to be pretty effective because they're super cheap and they're typically costly to defend against. Because a lot of times these drone missiles or sending up a sortie of fixed-wing fighters costs a lot more than it takes to build one of these cheap drones. And while they may not always get through, they end up having an effect. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this with you, Dad, is one, it seems like it's a pretty significant change from the policy of being, smart, exquisite, systems to achieve an effect. But also, you're kind of in this space right now. You were as an active duty, Navy officer, but you're kind of in this space now in what you're doing now since you've left the military. So I was interested to get your perspective on kind of this drone and kind of the way that the DoD is moving.
Yeah, so how the world has changed. Everybody's been talking about drones, and now we're finding that we're copying an Iranian drone. If I'm an Iranian aerospace engineer, I'm secretly proud of this right now. Of course, they've exported them to Russia, and they're being used quite extensively against Ukraine. And I think, obviously, we're not copying these things because they're super capable drones. They're sort of good enough drones to do what they need to do, but we're probably copying them because they're so cheap to build. And $35,000 sounds like a lot of money, but I doubt that you'll find a drone designed from scratch in the U.S. that would come in at less than $35,000. But certainly somebody's going to get at that. And we've been focused mostly on the high end due to our requirements and acquisition system, which encourages us to build the best weapons on the planet. And there's something good about that. But we also need to get massive amounts of these low-end drones into our system. And there's a couple of advantages. Now, that's a pretty big drone, actually. It's not something that an infantry squad is going to carry around with them. They're going to have to be launched from more of a designed capability. But this isn't the only type of drone that the U.S. is working on. It's a very target-rich environment, if you'll pardon the expression. A lot of people are starting to work on this problem of drone supply. One of the things that will be interesting is if we can get the supply chain for these things down, because we typically build our weapons at factories inside the United States, but these things are going to be used in such a volume that getting that means of production closer to the battlefield, like it is in Ukraine, is going to be something to think about. Maybe even manufacturing them in an expeditionary way, additive manufacturing, or just assembling the parts, or what have you. The other thing, whenever I talk about drones, I got to talk about counter drones. And that's equally, if not more important, on the battlefield today. And there are a lot of different ways to counter a drone. One is through electronic warfare. One of the companies that we are investing in my venture capital fund is called Orion Edge, which uses a very unique form of electronic warfare to go after drones. And you can jam a drone, you can spoof a drone, lots of different ways to hurt it electronically. You can also shoot at a drone, but there's potential collateral damage there. We are even looking at companies that have interceptor drones, where you can put a drone airborne that will shoot down other drones. So it's not just running one drone into another. You're actually getting more kills per drone with that kind of capability. But one of the things we're going to have to think about also is on the battlefield itself, being able to handle drones that are controlled by fiber optics, which are becoming prevalent in Ukraine, and they're less vulnerable to electronic warfare capabilities. So it's sort of, spy versus spy, drone versus drone. The capabilities continue to morph, and it's just interesting to me, as you picked up in the Wall Street Journal, that we're actually copying an Iranian drone. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. I think there was an article in the Marine Corps Gazette that I read a little while ago that I find that whenever I read something and I get defensive about what I'm reading about, it typically means that the author has a pretty good point, and I may be wrong. And the article, which I've got it right here, is called Exquisite and Insufficient. And it talks about how the Marine Corps may have missed a little bit of the boat with trying to procure very exquisite systems like the Naval Strike Missile and other things like that, and that they missed the boat on an opportunity to have a bunch of these, Shaheed-like drones that can achieve a similar effect much more cost effectively than a very, very expensive long range missile. And I that's the reason why I picked this article up, because to connect those two things is like, I think you still need those precision munitions that can go out and do a specific thing. But I think that the emphasis is being placed on some of these cheaper systems where you can achieve a lot of mass in any kind of situation that you might need, especially if there's a near peer or peer conflict. It seemed really interesting to me that both of these articles kind of came out around the same time, and that this idea of mass, small, cheap drones is kind of gaining a lot of momentum.
Yeah, I think the reason why these drones hit the battlefield in Ukraine is not only is it a disruptive form of warfare, it's that the people who were using them really weren't capable of building the high-end stuff. So this is what they reverted to, and it happened to work fairly well. But you're absolutely spot on. This is a broader theme, not just within drones. You really need to be able to do the ultra high-end stuff like ballistic missile defense and other forms of air and missile defense. The medium type things, like you talked about the Naval Strike Missile, which is a very, very capable weapon that would go do a much more difficult anti-ship job than any drone could do. And you need to have high volume of the low-end stuff. And the defense industry writ large is realizing this. The high-end primes are actually not averse to these lower-end, highly adaptive, highly agile, risk-taking companies coming in with systems like this. They recognize the need for that. But we also don't want the pendulum to swing too far and for people to think, hey, all these things are obsolete. It's all going to be about drones, low-end drones in the future. It's going to be a broad spectrum war, and we've got to be good at everything.
And I think that this is something that has been a part of how we've fought wars for a long time. But we have moved away from it because of the fact that we were fighting an insurgent battle, or even, in Iraq in the 90s, in the early 2000s, where we were kind of fighting an actual army, but with total air superiority, with technological superiority, where a lot of these precision strikes took precedence over being able to do small, cheap things well. Whereas if you look at a lot of the other conflicts, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, we had to still do the big things that you talk about, right? You still had to have the strategic level capabilities, but we were also very good at the tactical level, doing stuff well at the tactical level with cheap equipment. And I think that we're kind of we're slowly moving the boat, shifting the bow back towards that, which I think is smart. You don't want it to happen after you get into a conflict. You would much rather have it start to happen before.
Yeah, and you've got to be adaptable during the conflict. It's really interesting if you look at the ideal weapon system for what we were doing in a place like Afghanistan. The Reaper was perfect for that because, as you point out, we had air supremacy. There wasn't anybody who was going to threaten a Reaper arcing around over the Afghanistan, and it could employ Hellfire missiles pretty much unhindered. That's not true on other modern battlefields where anti-air capability will take out a Reaper fairly quickly, and we've lost a few in Yemen and other places.
Well, I'll interject real quick. Your point there is really important because we're seeing it now. I'm at Expeditionary Warfare School for the Marine Corps, and we employ MQ-9s. The Marine Corps does not have MQ-9s that can actually deliver a kinetic strike with Hellfires. We don't have that capability. We rely on the Air Force for that, but we do have it for surveillance. And what we've already seen in the war games that we've done as we learn about how to plan in the Marine Corps, these large-scale operations, that these Reapers are going down very early, very quick. And so all of these collections plans, all of these potential strike plans, all of these very intricate kill chains that we're spending a lot of time developing end up breaking down. And we have to find other ways to do it. But anyway, please continue.
Well, I was just going to say, as we close out this segment, it's been really interesting for me to watch the whole evolution of the drone warfare because I was one of the first people to employ a drone in actual combat off of the amphibious ship USS Cleveland. We had the Pioneer drone, which was one of the very earliest. It was the earliest drone really in the U.S. inventory. It was launched with a rocket bottle off of the flight deck of the ship, and it had a little snowmobile engine with a propeller, and it could fly about 100 miles before it ran out of communications distance. But we were in the North Arabian Gulf, and we found an Iraqi missile on the Al-Fa Peninsula that was struck the next day by airplanes from USS Enterprise. And so watching that very crude system evolve into what is happening today, and this is over the course of a decade and a half, has been fascinating. It's also interesting on the reconnaissance side of drones that all of our reconnaissance prior to that had been with fixed imagery. We had the TARP spot on the F-14, satellite images, that kind of thing, and we had a video camera on this little Pioneer. And that really opened our eyes because we were able to find a radar on the Al-Fa Peninsula that nobody had been able to find using any electronic means. We knew it was there. Nobody could find it using still pictures. We found it almost immediately using our video camera on the Pioneer drone because we saw the antenna rotating. And ever since then, look at what video from the sky has turned into. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, and now you're seeing even small squads of Marines use small quadcopters to gain, situational awareness on the battle space in the battlefield. There are capabilities now that are at a young sergeant's fingertips that were at the 06 level, the Navy captain level, a couple decades ago. And it's very interesting to see the arc of this progression. Let's move on to our next topic. So we were originally going to only talk about two things, and I want to jump into this one before we get to our last topic about service members making a bunch of money trading crypto, because I think it's very salient right now. The fact that we just talked about the Constellation class of frigates getting canceled, now the Navy has jumped into basically purchasing a new ship that kind of sounds like the same thing that we just went through with the frigates. The Navy, in conjunction with the Marine Corps, has decided to procure a new amphibious ship, the Landing Ship Medium, or LSM. And that there's been LSMs in our Navy's history for a long time, going all the way back to World War II, but this is the newest version of it. And it will be based on a European design. Stop me if you've heard this before. The Dutch Damen LST 100. And I think the Australians are also going to be using this as well, but they just decided to pick this. It's going to fold within the Marine Corps' Force Design 2030. The Marine Corps wants 35 ships, and current Navy planning docs say the overall program will likely land somewhere between 18 and 35 hulls, with the Landing Ship Medium taking up a lot of this delta. Right off of the riff, Dad, what are your thoughts about the LSM and kind of this whole shipbuilding, I'll call it a fiasco that we're kind of in right now as a nation?
Yeah, so I sort of feel strongly both ways. Navy Secretary John Phelan announced this last week that this was the second phase of his desire to sort of transform Navy shipbuilding. We've known for a long time that the Marines are a sea-based force. They need to have amphibious lift. And there's been talk for a long time about the Landing Ship Medium, and there were a couple of contracts that were let exploring it, and nothing's ever really happened. And now the Navy's making this sort of bold move, and the mission is to rapidly move Marines and equipment in, they call it, high-risk dispersed environments, complementing larger amphibious assault ships. As you mentioned, it's based on a Dutch design. And it'll carry troops and vehicles. It has space for helicopters, and it can directly beach ashore, which is a very useful capability. And it's expected to enter service around 2029. Now, the selection of an off-the-shelf design already present on the market is targeted at the goal of minimizing production risk, bringing down cost, and getting the ships quickly, although 2029 seems a little bit later than it should be. They're going to be built at various shipyards across the country, which is a good idea because that'll foster competition, and hopefully that competition will keep the price down, as we've seen with the DDG class that is built in two different shipyards. 4,000-ton ship, 3,400-mile range, carries a lot of cargo, lots of ro-ro capability in the front ramp. A couple of concerns on the side that I think we have to make sure are accounted for. This recent frigate cancellation had a lot to do with a foreign design having to be modified to meet U.S. survivability standards. And hopefully that won't become a problem here. You would think they have thought that through based on the lessons they learned from the frigate program, but I don't know. The other thing is, how vulnerable is this ship? Is it going to be able to do opposed landings? They talk about high risk environments, but how survivable will it be in a high end or even a low end environment? Will it have to have a very close escort? How much self defense capability? You don't really see that on the diagrams of the ship, and you kind of wonder whether that's going to start getting added on and added on. But I'm going to be optimistic about the program. The Navy and the Marine Corps need it. We're going to be able to build it faster than the bigger ships at the bigger shipyards. Being able to build a lot of these ships in many different shipyards will be helpful at scale. I just hope they can get it done before 2029. Think about that. It's late 2025. That's 4 years. When you think about how quickly we got ships into service, and this is a fairly simple ship we're talking about here, how quickly we got ships into service in World War II, why can't we do that now? So I think I would throw that out as a stretch goal to see if they could get that thing going.
And World War II, I mean, the impetus for building ships was readily apparent. I don't think that there was much appetite from anyone to not get ships out quickly. And I think the other piece too of World War II, because a lot of people they jump back to World War II. Oh, we built so many ships so quickly. You know, the entire United States economy was shifted to support the war effort, and so I think that plays a large part into it. But on top of that, the ships back then were not nearly as complicated as the ships that we have now, which there's reasons for that. We definitely want to have superior technology, but also I think we do a little bit of that to ourselves, right? And I can see this with the LSM. My concern is that they quote unquote gold plate this thing, where they have a really good design already. They got something that's proven, that works, and they try to fill it with a bunch of different capabilities. They try to make it more survivable. It's kind of like we talked about last week, where you have a ship to fulfill a specific role. And maybe you accept some risk if that ship has to start executing that role as, you know, the level of conflict escalates, right? It should the LSM should absolutely be able to defend itself. It should have good survivability, right? Because, I mean, I very well could be on that ship in conflict. But at the same time, do we really see this thing going contested onto the beach in Taiwan or onto the beach, you know, somewhere in the Middle East, right? I think the answer is no. I think that this could be used to move people and things. And then if you get into a high-end, high-scale conflict, now you've got a design that works. You can produce it at scale if you need to. And now you've dispersed this thing everywhere. And the reality of the situation is, and I say this with skin in the game, is that when you go and you have a high-scale conflict like that, you're going to lose people on a magnitude that we have not seen for a very long time. And so if you have a lot of these things distributed, right, I would much rather have a ton of them moving supplies all over the place. And if a few of them get hit and you happen to lose a few of them, you know, hey, it's war, and that's the reality of it. But you have a capability that allows you to be distributed, where you can continue to get supplies, people, and things to different locations. So I think that making this thing a fortress that has a ton of survivability, that's able to defend itself against everything, I care a little bit less about that than I do about it being able to achieve a capability, provide a credible, threat in the fact that it can move supplies, logistics, lethal capability all across a specific geographic area, so that it's just another thing that an adversary would have to add to its calculus. It's like, hey, they've got this really good logistical backbone here. Maybe I hold off for a little bit before I actually escalate this conflict, because I know they have robust logistics.
Well, I think that it's going to have some kind of basic self-defense capability. And as you say, it can't be Battlestar Galactica. It's just doesn't have the weight capability, the space capability, or the cost capability to get that done. But I think there is room to maneuver here. And I'll just give you an example. The Spy-6 radar that's on the newest DDGs is a shameless plug. It's a Raytheon product, and I'm on the board of Raytheon. But it's a modular radar, and it has a number of different radar modules on it, and you can take a couple of those radar modules and make a much smaller radar that isn't quite as capable in terms of range and discrimination, but it's a pretty good radar, and we've actually done that. The new radars that are on new aircraft carriers are scaled down versions of that same Spy-6 radar. So in terms of being able to just detect a threat that's coming at you, and then the question becomes, what kind of weapon systems are you going to have on that ship to at least give you some kind of minimal self-defense capability, while you're relying probably on some other platform like a DDG to provide for more robust defense. But I'm anxious to see how fast it gets built, whether it's built at quality, stays on cost, and then how the Marine Corps and the Navy employ this platform. I want to try to be positive on it, and it has a lot of potential. But as you say, potentially before the hot war starts, maybe not during the hot war.
Well, and you need to train with this thing if it's actually going to be a part of your arsenal. I think it could be. We talk a lot about in the Marine Corps prepositioning of supplies, particularly in the Southeast Asian littorals, and how do you resupply forward advanced bases that have Marines that are in an austere environment. And I think that this could absolutely fulfill that. So, you've got a credible stand-in force right inside the hot zone. And if it seems like I am being negative about this, I don't want it to necessarily come across that way. I just want it to be, I'm tired of seeing all of these ships that we say are going to show up and then they either don't show up or they're well over budget. And I think I'm sharing a frustration that a lot of people agree with. I think it could be a very, very capable platform. And I have wanted something like this as a Marine. I have wanted something like this from our shipbuilding for a long time, right? I thought the LCS could do it. I think it still can, although it is not as capable as it was supposed to be. But I've wanted a landing ship medium that has these kinds of capabilities for a long time because I think it just makes us a lot more versatile as a force. So I am excited for it. I just want to, I'm tempering my hopes here because I'm concerned that it's going to be, like I said, gold-plated.
Hopefully it's not Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, and that we've actually learned our lessons from the shipbuilding industrial side and budgeting side. Hopefully Congress will support it, and I hope it's a fast ship for what it's supposed to do. So, anyway, Speaking of money.
Yes, money. So we'll move to our final topic, which was the other Wall Street Journal piece that I sent your way. This one, a little bit of a lighter topic. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts after I kind of lay out the scene here. But the piece was titled something like Top Gun Traders. Some of you who are listening to this may
traders
have read the
as
article.
in Traders.
Yeah, traders as in like stock traders, not traitors. But the main point of the article is that a significant slice of the force has gotten really into trading. Tech stocks, meme stocks, Bitcoin, altcoins, all kinds of stuff like that.
Prediction markets like Polymarket, Kalshi. Yeah.
Not your ETFs, your index funds, what would be quote unquote more boring. This has boomed since COVID, but it was present well before then. The article talks about all kinds of different service members who were overseas during the two wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Specifically, they talk about some pilots who were in a combat zone, sitting there on like a 5 to 10 minute strip alert, checking their phones and talking about trades in between combat sorties. Like I said, a lot of this has not been about traditional index funds, but rather all of these social media driven stocks, like meme stocks, as they're sometimes referred to. And they actually even specifically in their article talk about covered call options as well, which I know has gained a ton of popularity with a lot of service members lately. And this has worked out really well for some. Personally, some personal anecdotes. A sailor, an officer in my wife's squadron, bought Dogecoin back when Dogecoin first came out. And then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 years later, he's driving around a brand new Corvette, super souped up, probably $200,000 car, because Dogecoin exploded. And then he was also early in on NVIDIA, and NVIDIA exploded. Now everyone around him was like, hey, what's next? Because they wanted to get in on the next new biggest thing. And then additionally, when I was a platoon commander in Camp Pendleton, I had a young sergeant who one day showed up to work. I can't remember what kind of car it was, but it was a really, really expensive car that's well outside the means for a sergeant to pay. And as a leader, you're like, okay, we need to sit this guy down. We need to talk about what the financial situation is. How did you get this car? So I brought him into my office and really tried to figure out, okay, what's your financial situation? And he was pretty reluctant to tell me at first, but after a little bit of digging and prodding, I found out that he had something like $26 million worth of Bitcoin that his cousin had told him to invest in back when he was in high school. And so at that moment, picking my jaw up off the floor, said, okay, if you're not BSing me right now, my recommendation is you pull at least half of that. If you want to leave some in the market and leave it in Bitcoin, go for it. But pull at least 10 of those 26 million out so that your family never has to worry about finances ever again. And he turned to me and he said, sir, a lot of people have tried to convince me to do something like that, and they've constantly been wrong, but I really appreciate it, but I'm going to keep it where it is. And mind you, that was when Bitcoin was at like $45,000 a coin. And now it's more like 90,000. So he's probably getting the last laugh because now he's got like 50 million or more, depending on if he kept buying. But the point here is that when I saw this, it was kind of like, oh, well, duh, because it's constantly surrounding not just enlisted service members, but also our officer corps as well. Everyone is talking about stocks. Everyone's talking about trades. They're talking about Bitcoin. They're talking about all this stuff. And I think there's some reasons for why it's so popular, and we can get into that. But I just found it very, very intriguing that now it's garnered so much attention that it's in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. First, I'll tell you that one thing that I was always worried about, it was always on my mind when I was on active duty, particularly in command positions, was my sailors' financial health. Most of them did not grow up being taught basic financial literacy, either by their parents or at school. I'm talking even the basics, like having a budget and not spending more than you earn, or how to buy a car or furniture, much less whether and how to invest wisely. Now, as the captain of Enterprise, I spent an hour with a group of newly arrived sailors nearly every week. We had 3,000 sailors, so you can do the math, and we had a whole bunch showing up nearly every week. And yeah, I talked about the ship and its legacy, our schedule, and our principles and that kind of thing. But the financial literacy piece was so bad from these people that I spent at least half of the hour talking to them about simple financial literacy because the Navy wasn't very good at it. Hopefully that's changed over the last, decade or so. Regarding the kind of trading you're talking about, trading's always risky, and high-risk trading is highly risky. Young people are inherently more welcome to taking risk than old gray people like me, and the kind of people we're talking about are used to living with risk every day, so they welcome it even more maybe than the average bear, although this is not just a military problem. But it's really easy to get overconfident. A fool and his money are quickly separated. I remember some of my colleagues when I was a young fighter pilot boasting about their stock trading prowess, but it rarely amounted to anything. And the very rare high success stories, the stories that you just talked about, are not only not drowned out by the failure stories, but those stories actually encourage more people to get into it because they think they can do it too. I also worry a little bit that some of these folks could be exposing themselves to different kind of risk, to compromise from bad actors in any of a number of ways, from cyber threats while they're on their phones overseas doing their trading, to extortion threats, to simply being distracted from their very important and risky mission that they might be doing, even though they're maybe in downtime. Frankly, again, this is the gray talking, not necessarily the gritty, but I'd rather see young people putting their hard-earned money into solid investments and then spending their time doing something to improve themselves for the long run, like reading broadly or getting an online master's degree in something that matters, something like that. So it's exciting, it's interesting, but you got to be so careful.
I have personally felt the tug of wanting to jump into this because I have so many peers that have done it, and not an insignificant number have made money because we are in an incredible bull market right now with respect to a lot of these things. I mean, you talk about crypto, you talk about a lot of these meme stocks or tech stocks. We've been in such an incredible bull market that hardly anybody has lost money in those specific areas. There are tons of people who have lost money on futures trading, like I'm talking about the Kalshis, the poly markets, stuff like that, because they just don't, they think they have access to the information that would give them an edge, but they really don't. And last night, as I was looking to get prepared for this podcast, I was looking on Kalshi just to kind of see what you could trade on that website. And you mentioned Fareed Zakaria, because my mom was watching it before you jumped on to the podcast here. You could bet on what Fareed Zakaria was going to say today on his show, like specific words. And, that kind of easy access to betting on anything, something where you feel like you might have an edge because some topic is happening, and okay, I'm going to put $1,000 that Fareed Zakaria is going to say Ukraine on his show today for a return of $500 or $600 or $700. To them, I think it seems like they're getting access to something that used to not be available to them, which was the ability to make money quickly. And I think that when you look at social media, and as you said, when someone hits it big on a crypto bet, on a meme stock, or something like that, it is amplified. And one of the things that the Wall Street Journal article did not necessarily say, they touch a little bit on it, but all of the people that have lost money. There was like one little paragraph that talked about a service member who lost like $250,000, but now is back on track because now he's in index funds and using the decent pay that he's getting from the military to get back on track. But because it's amplified, and because you have quick access to easy betting and meme stocks and stuff like that, also through Robinhood, and you can place a bet on anything, you can buy almost any stock instantaneously, I think a lot of people are setting themselves up for potential failure. And my concern is that if this bull market ends and a large chunk of our formations see severe drawdowns all at once, what is that going to do for the mental health of the force? What is that going to do for the mental health of these individuals? What is it going to mean for their financial stability? I think a lot of bad things happen. And you talk about being exposed as well to a different kind of risk. I think that that's definitely out there, although I'm less concerned about that than I am their entire life savings getting wiped out because Dogecoin drops by 90% or Bitcoin falls or something to that effect.
It's not it's hard to tell the difference between gambling and investing in this case. And gambling, we all know, can become an addiction. And when I can bet on what the temperature is going to be tomorrow, where I live, literally what degrees it's going to reach, that is a lot of people are going to fall for that because of the dopamine rush and all that. And as you point out, the failures don't go viral, only the successes go viral. So it does raise an important question, and that is, not only do the services need to make sure they're doing really high quality financial literacy training for their people and telling them how to buy a car and what kind of interest rate you should expect and that sort of thing. This is another dimension that needs to be folded into that, where service members are at least exposed to what the true risks are of that kind of behavior, and also sensitivity on the part of the chain of command to being able to recognize when somebody's going through this and helping them through it, so that it doesn't turn into a disaster, a divorce-causing disaster, or worse.
You just made me think of two things. The first one is, I think that service members now more than ever are more financially literate than they've ever been. Just talking with my Marines, Lauren talking with her sailors, I think they're more financially literate, and that's a double-edged sword because they know, okay, I need to put money in my IRA, I need to max out my thrift savings program, which is the military's version of a 401k. But at the same time, they're also plugged into, okay, hey, this meme stock might go, right? And now I know how
knowledge can be dangerous.
Exactly. But I think that they're for the most part, service members are very financially literate. But I will say that I never once, I think I may have gotten a financial literacy class, maybe, at the basic school, but I can't even really remember it, so it obviously didn't have a big impact on me. Now, that may also be because you've done a really good job teaching me about finances since I was very young, and so I just didn't really pay attention to it. But I don't really remember getting any class. And like I said, it's not just the enlisted personnel that, would need this financial literacy. There's a lot of officers, too, who just have no clue. And even though we are more financially literate than ever, I think there's a lot more the services can do here to boost the financial literacy of the force.
Yeah, we talk about how we want to take care of the health of our service members, and that's not only physical health and mental health, it's also financial health. And there's also a lot of predators out there, people hanging around the Navy Exchange, the Marine Corps Exchange, the Air Force and Army system, waiting to lure sailors into investing through their platforms or buying insurance they don't necessarily need. And that kind of predatory behavior is almost as bad as this.
Absolutely.
So here we are gearing up for the Christmas holidays. It's December 7th when we're recording this, and so we'll remember Pearl Harbor today and all the sacrifices that were made on that day that really are what got us deeply into World War II. A very short, sharp, very important conflict, and the big push for everybody and their jobs is going to be over the next couple of weeks, and then hopefully everybody will have a great holiday season. But in the meantime, we're going to be coming at you again next Monday with another episode.
Of course, I think it's very important this time of year to not count the days to a specific event and to not draw on a one day or one trip or one holiday season for your joy. I think we tend to count down the days until Christmas, count down the days until New Year's, count down the days until whatever it may be, hoping that it will give us a lot of joy. But sometimes the enjoyment, the happiness from those events may not meet your expectations. And so living in the moment, enjoying what you have now, and enjoying the fact and counting your blessings that you have something to look forward to, I think is very important. So hoping for, speaking of singular events that I don't want to pull too much joy or anger from, hoping for a Navy victory against Army on Saturday. We will be at the game. If you're going to be there, let us know. We can link up.
One of the things I'll relay to this great audience is, when I was on active duty in a senior role, I went to an Army-Navy game, and of course I'm a Georgia Tech graduate, so whatever. And I was on a radio interview, and the interviewer asked me, "So who's going to win today?" And I think that interviewer was expecting me to say, well, of course, Navy's going to win today. But I really came back and said the American people win today. Because if you look out at this crowd, you got 4,000 Navy and Marine Corps midshipmen. You got 4,000 Army cadets. And these are the best people our country has to offer. And we're all winners today. But I know that doesn't help a Naval Academy guy think any differently.
Well, there's two common sayings with this game is that, we're brothers for 364 days and sworn enemies for one day, and that day is Army Navy. And then the second one is, it's the only game where everybody playing the game would die for the people watching the game. And I truly believe that every American should do two things. The first one is go to the Grand Canyon because I think it's just one of the most beautiful things in the world. The second is go to an Army-Navy football game. Get there early, go tailgate in the parking lot, interact with people, and then watch the march on of the Brigade of Midshipmen and the cadets beforehand. Because it's truly a one-of-a-kind event, and I think it makes you appreciate everything that we have as Americans.
That's a great way to finish up, and we'll see all of you next week, hopefully.
Yep, we'll have another episode next week. There's going to be more that happens. If you are new here, Gray and Gritty, we try to stay as apolitical as possible, talking about leadership, national security, and geopolitics, cutting through the noise to get you actually what really matters. And frankly, at the end of the day, this is just a conversation between my dad and I, and we're happy to have you here along for it. See you next week.